Ever get that feeling where you just want to like cut to the chase? Get to the heart of something, like really understand the foundation of an idea without getting bogged down in all the little details.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I feel like that all the time, especially with, like, complex topics. You
Yeah.
just want that shortcut to understanding.
Right. Well, that's kind of what we're aiming for today, right? Our listeners have told us they love getting that efficient but thorough deep dive. So today we're tackling a pretty foundational text, the book of Hebrews in the Bible.
Yeah, specifically those first few chapters, 1 through 3. We're gonna unpack those today.
Exactly. And, for those of you out there who are familiar with the Bible, Hebrews is a bit unique, right?
It is, yeah. It
Yeah.
reads more like a letter, an ancient letter, really. And it's pretty focused in these early chapters on making some pretty powerful arguments about Jesus, right? The central figure of Christianity.
Right. And it's important to remember the Bible as a whole is this huge collection of ancient writings, spanning all these different genres, historical periods, and all that. But Hebrews, especially in these first chapters, it kind of stands out because it's so detailed. And it's really focused on reasoning, like laying out these arguments to explain the significance of Jesus.
That's a great point. I mean, it doesn't just tell stories or give commands. It really tries to persuade you, logically,
Yeah.
about who Jesus is.
Exactly. So our mission today is to cut through all that potential complexity, because it can get dense sometimes, and just pull out those core claims. Like, what is Hebrews actually saying about Jesus? And why does the author keep insisting it matters so much? Like,
Yeah.
what's the big deal here? And we'll try to do all that without, like, getting you lost in the theological weeds.
Yeah, totally. No rabbit holes today. We
Okay.
want to get you those key takeaways, like aha moments, but without overwhelming you. That's the goal.
Right? Efficient knowledge. That's what we're after. So let's jump right in, huh? Chapter 1. It starts out pretty strong, doesn't it? It goes right to the heart of things.
It does. It draws a sharp contrast right off the bat, talking about how God communicated in the past versus how he speaks now.
Exactly. It says, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. That but now part and that emphasis on his Son, that's a huge shift, right? Like something big is happening here.
It's like the author saying, listen up. Things have changed. This isn't business as usual anymore.
For sure. And it doesn't take long for them to start outlining, like, why the Son is such a big deal.
It really doesn't. Almost immediately, it starts listing his credentials, his significance in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
You're really emphasizing who he is.
So, like, what kind of credentials are we talking about here?
Okay, well, it says he's the heir of all things,
Yeah.
right? And then it says he's the one through whom also he created the world. That's massive. We're not talking about just some historical figure here. It's directly tying him to the creation of everything.
Wow. I mean, that's a pretty bold claim right from the start.
It really is. It lays the groundwork for everything that follows.
Okay, so then it goes on to describe his nature, right? Like
Yeah.
who he is at his core. And it uses some pretty intense descriptions. Like it says, he's the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. And then he upholds the universe by the word of his power. I mean, those are some heavy descriptions. What are we supposed to understand from all that?
Right. Those are packed with meaning. Radiance of glory. Think of it like a light that shines directly from God, completely inseparable from its source. And then exact imprint of his nature that suggests like a perfect representation of God himself. And the part about upholding the universe, I mean, that means he's not just the one who started it all, he's actively keeping it all going. Think of it like, I don't know, the operating system for all of existence. It's all running through him.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to get the picture. So we've got this powerful divine figure who created and sustains everything. And then, it mentions something else about him, right? Like what he did.
Yeah, it says, after making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. That's super important. The way it's phrased, it presents his work of dealing with sin as completed, done. And now he's in this place of supreme honor and authority next to God.
Wow. Okay. So all of this is leading to the main point of the chapter, right? This whole idea that the Son is superior to angels.
Exactly. Yeah. And to really drive that point home, the author starts using all these rhetorical questions and pulling quotes from the Old Testament. Like, he asks, for to which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son, today I have begotten you? Or again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. That's powerful. He's making it clear that this special, familial bond with God, it belongs to the Son and the Son alone. No angel can claim that.
And it's not just about like titles and positions, right? There's a real difference in how angels and the sun are described.
Absolutely. There's a hierarchy being laid out here. Like, take this, for example. And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. So right there, you see the Son's preeminence. Even the angels, these powerful spiritual beings, are commanded to worship him.
So angels are powerful but still subservient.
Yeah, exactly. And then goes on to describe them. He makes his angels winds and his servants flames of fire. So yeah, they're powerful forces for sure. But they're ultimately carrying out God's will. They're serving a function.
But when it describes the sun, well, it's on a whole other level, isn't it?
Completely different. It says, but of the Son, he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. Notice that. He's directly addressed as God. And it mentions the oil of gladness being poured on him, which, in the Old Testament, that signifies a unique blessing and favor from God. It's setting him apart.
So the son is not just a servant or messenger, he's something much greater.
Exactly. And then it gets even more interesting because it starts contrasting the Son's eternal nature with the created order. It's quoting from the Old Testament again, saying, you, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment, like a robe. You'll roll them up and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will have no end.
Yeah, there's a stark contrast being made, right? The universe, everything we see, it's temporary, it's going to wear out like an old piece of clothing. But the son, he's eternal. He remains the same.
It's like the author is saying, look, the created order is amazing, but it's not ultimate. The Son, though, he's beyond all that. He's the bedrock of reality.
Wow, okay. And then the chapter ends by bringing it all back to that idea of the son's supreme position, right?
It does. It asks again, and to which of the angels has he ever said, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool?
Hmm.
That image of sitting at God's right hand, that's about ultimate authority and power. It's a position no angel could ever claim.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate second in command. So they made it pretty clear that the son is on a whole different level than angels. And then just to like solidify their point about the role of angels, it says, are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation? So their purpose is service, right?
Yeah.
And they ultimately serve those who will receive salvation.
Exactly. They're there to help, to minister. But the Son, his role is different. He's not a servant. He's the one in charge.
Okay, so the first chapter, it's basically laying the foundation. This son, Jesus, he's not just another messenger. He's something way more. He's divine, he's the creator, he's eternal, he's superior to even the highest angels. And that leads us right into chapter 2, which is all about how we should respond to this, incredible truth.
Right, exactly. Chapter 2 kicks off with a pretty serious warning, right? A direct consequence of what they just laid out in Chapter 1. It says, therefore, we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it.
So it's about paying attention, taking this message seriously. And
Yeah.
the way it's phrased, it almost sounds like there's a danger in not doing so.
Oh, for sure. It's like they're saying, look, this message, this Son, it's so important, so weighty, that if you're not careful, you could drift away from it. You could miss out on something huge.
That's interesting. And then it makes this comparison, right? It talks about the consequences of disobeying angels compared to neglecting this great salvation offered through the Son.
Yeah. It says, for if the word spoken by angels proves to be reliable, and every transgression and disobedience received a just retribution, how shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? He's drawing a parallel, saying that if there were consequences for ignoring messages delivered by angels, imagine the consequences for neglecting salvation brought by someone far greater.
That's a pretty sobering thought. So they're basically saying, don't mess around with this.
Right. This isn't something to take lightly.
Okay, and the salvation they keep talking about, it wasn't just like, announced and that's it. It was confirmed, right?
There-
It was evident.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They make that clear. It says, it was declared at first by the Lord, and it was attested to us by those who heard him, while God also bore witness by signs and wonders and various miracles, and by gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to his will. So it starts with Jesus himself proclaiming this salvation. And then you have the people who were there who saw and heard it firsthand, confirming what he said. And then, on top of that, you have God himself backing it all up with all these supernatural events.
So it's not just a message, it's a message that's been verified.
Exactly. The author's saying, this isn't just some made-up story. This actually happened, and there's plenty of proof to back it up.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly important message of salvation delivered by this superior son, backed up by all these signs and wonders. And then it takes kind of a turn, doesn't it? It starts talking about humanity's role, specifically in relation to angels.
It does. It says, "For it was not to angels that God subjected the world to come, of which we are speaking." And that's interesting because up to this point, it's been all about how amazing and powerful the Son is, how he's above the angels. But then it shifts focus to us, to humanity.
And I feel like that might surprise some people, right? Because you'd think that with all this talk about the sun and angels, maybe angels are the ones who are supposed to be in charge of everything.
It's easy to assume that, for sure. But the author's making it clear. That's not God's plan. He's got something else in mind for humanity.
Okay, so what is God's plan? What's the point of bringing humanity into this discussion?
Well, they actually quote from Psalm 8 to explain this. It says, "What is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? You made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet." This ancient psalm, it's all about how God values humanity, how he's given us this incredible purpose and position.
So humanity is meant to have dominion over creation, even though right now it doesn't seem like that's the case.
Right. And the author acknowledges that. It says, "Now in putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside his control. At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him." So the vision is there, the intention is there, but it's not fully realized yet.
And that's where Jesus comes back into the picture, right? He's the key to bridging that gap between the ideal and the reality.
Exactly. The next verse explains it. But we see Jesus, who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Jesus, even though he's divine, he willingly humbled himself, took on a lower status, even experienced death, all for the sake of humanity.
So his suffering wasn't meaningless. It had a specific purpose.
Exactly. And the purpose is spelled out pretty clearly. "For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering." By suffering, Jesus became the perfect pioneer of salvation, the one who leads the way for others to experience God's glory.
So he went through all that so we wouldn't have to.
That's the idea. He paved the way for us. And it gets even more powerful because it emphasizes how much Jesus identifies with us, with humanity. It calls those who believe in him his brothers and sisters.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong statement. It's not just like a teacher and student relationship, it's something much deeper.
Right. It's about family. It says, "For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers." And then it backs this up with quotes from the Old Testament like, "I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me."
Okay, so he's not just some distant, powerful being. He's one of us. He calls us his family. And that leads to this whole idea of the incarnation, right? Like
Yeah.
God actually becoming human. And it connects that directly to the purpose of his death.
Exactly. It says, "Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death," that is, the devil, "and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery." By becoming fully human and experiencing death, Jesus broke the power of death and the devil, setting people free from that fear that had held them captive.
So it wasn't just a random act of sacrifice. It was a strategic victory over death itself. And it specifically mentions that he's not helping angels, right? It's humanity that he's focused on.
Right. It says, "For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham." He's fulfilling the promises made to Abraham and his descendants. His solidarity is with us.
Okay, and the chapter wraps up by talking about Jesus as the merciful and faithful high priest. Now, for someone who's not, super familiar with religious terms, what does that even mean? Like, what's a high
A
priest?
good question. Think of a high priest as like the ultimate mediator, the
Yeah.
go-between. It's the person who represents the people before God, offering sacrifices and pleading on their behalf.
Okay, so Jesus is like that for us.
Exactly. And the text explains why he's such a great high priest. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered and been tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. Because he's fully human, because he's gone through what we go through, he can sympathize with us, he can relate to our struggles, and he can effectively intercede for us before God.
So, chapter 2, it's all about why this message of salvation is so important. It's about this son who's not just powerful, but compassionate, who understands us, who died for us, and who now represents us before God. And that sets us up perfectly for chapter 3, which brings in another comparison, this time with Moses.
Yes, and Moses is a huge figure in their history, right? He's the one who led them out of slavery, the one who received the Ten Commandments. He's like the ultimate lawgiver.
Exactly. So, why bring him into the picture now?
Well, the chapter starts by addressing the believers, saying, "Therefore, holy brothers, you who share in a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession." Again, it's directly addressing the listeners, including them in this community.
Okay, and the comparison being made here is between Jesus and Moses,
Well,
right?
And it starts by acknowledging their faithfulness. He was faithful to him who appointed him, just as Moses also was faithful in all God's house. Both are presented as faithful in their roles.
But then it quickly pivots to establish Jesus' greater glory and authority.
Yes, it says, "For Jesus has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, as much more glory as the builder of a house has more honor than the house itself." It's a simple analogy. The one who builds the house is greater than the house itself. And God is the ultimate builder of all things, including the house or the system in which Moses served.
So Moses was faithful, but his role was ultimately within a structure created by someone greater.
Exactly. And it goes on to clarify that. Now, Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant, to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. But Christ is faithful over God's house as a son, and we are his house, if indeed we hold fast our confidence and our boasting in our hope. Moses was a servant, pointing towards things to come. But Christ, as the son, he's the one in charge of God's house, and believers are part of that house if they remain steadfast in their faith.
Okay, and then comes a pretty stark warning. It starts quoting from Psalm 95, which talks about the Israelites rebelling against God in the wilderness.
Right. It says, "Therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, on the day of testing in the wilderness, where your fathers put me to the test and saw my works for 40 years. This story is meant to be a cautionary tale. It's about the consequences of disobeying God, of hardening your heart against him.
And when it talks about God's rest in this context, what does that even mean?
Good question. Think of rest here as the fullness of God's promises, a state of spiritual peace and security that God intended for his people.
Okay, so the Israelites, they missed out on that because of their rebellion.
Exactly. And the author uses their failure as a warning for his audience. He says, "Therefore I was provoked with that generation and said, they always go astray in their hearts, and they have not known my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest." He's making it clear that there are consequences for disobedience.
Yeah, it sounds like he's really concerned that his readers will make the same mistake.
He definitely is. And he gets really specific about what they need to do. "Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin." He's saying, be careful, guard your hearts, don't let unbelief take root, and encourage each other to stay strong in your faith.
So it's not just about individual faith, it's about supporting each other, reminding each other of the truth.
Exactly. We need each other in this. And he emphasizes how important it is to hold on to that initial faith, that original confidence, as he calls it.
Yeah, he says, "For we have come to share in Christ, if indeed we hold our original confidence firm to the end." So it's not just about starting well, it's about finishing well, persevering in our faith.
Exactly. We need to keep going, keep trusting, keep believing. And to drive that point home, he repeats the warning from Psalm 95. "As it is said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion." The opportunity to respond to God's voice is always there, but so is the danger of rejecting it.
It's like a constant choice we have to make.
Right? Every day, we're choosing to either listen to God's voice or harden our hearts against him. And then the author uses these rhetorical questions to remind them of what happened to those who rebelled in the past. He asks, "For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all those who left Egypt led by Moses, and with whom was he provoked for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest? but to those who are disobedient.
He's reminding them that disobedience has consequences.
Yeah, and he wants them to learn from the mistakes of the past. And the chapter ends with this powerful statement about why that generation failed. So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. It's not about a lack of knowledge or a lack of good intentions. It all boils down to unbelief.
Okay, so chapter 3, it's a pretty strong warning, but it's also an encouragement, right? It's saying, don't make the same mistakes. Hold on to your faith in Jesus. He's greater than Moses. He's the key to entering God's rest.
Exactly. It's a call to persevere, to trust in Jesus, and follow him faithfully.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive today, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? We've journeyed through these first 3 chapters of Hebrews, and it's been a pretty intense journey. I mean, they're making a pretty compelling case for the absolute superiority of Jesus, right? They're comparing him to prophets, to angels, even to Moses, and each time they're saying, Jesus is greater. He's the one you need to pay attention to.
It's not just about ranking them, though, right? It's about understanding who Jesus is and what he's done for us. He's the divine Son, the creator, the sustainer of the universe, the one who purified us from sin, the exalted Lord seated at God's right hand. He's the one who became human, who died for us, and who now intercedes for us before God. And they're saying, don't take this lightly. This message is too important to ignore.
It's like, wake up, pay attention. This changes everything.
Exactly. And they're using the story of the Israelites in the wilderness to warn us, to say, don't repeat their mistakes. Don't let unbelief keep you from experiencing all that God has for you.
It's a pretty sobering thought. And it makes you think, right? Like, if this is how the book starts, if this is the foundation they're laying, what does that mean for the rest of the book? What other amazing truths are they going to unpack?
It's exciting to think about. And it also makes you wonder, how does this impact us today? How does knowing who Jesus is, knowing all that he's done, how does that change the way we live, the way we see the world, the way we relate to God?
Yeah, that's something for all of us to ponder, right? To really wrestle with.
Definitely. And I think that's a great place to leave it for today. This is just the beginning of the journey through Hebrews, and there's so much more to discover.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Hebrews chapters 1 through 3. I hope this has been helpful, insightful, and maybe even a little challenging.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.